Chasing Giants with Don Higgins and Terry Peer. Brought to you by Osseo Camo, nature's most lethal camouflage. Follow along as Don and Terry discuss the techniques, strategies, and dedication needed to harvest one of God's most amazing creations, world-class whitetails.
Well, welcome everyone to the Chasing Giants podcast, episode 254 with Don Higgins. I'm Terry Peer. We're brought to you by Osseo Gear. And this is an awkward holiday week recording. It's the day after, 2 days after Christmas, the 27th. Don has been sick with the crud since before Christmas, and I have had to travel to West Virginia, right on the Virginia-West Virginia line, to attend the funeral services of my grandmother. So between Don coughing and me having slow internet in the mountains, I hope this works. So bear with us as we get through this week and try to bring you some good content. We got a couple pretty interesting things to talk about. But I appreciate my cousin Josh Kiter for letting me set up shop in his trophy room down here. He has the fastest internet of all the local family members around, so we're going to give it a whirl. Don, how was your Christmas? And I know you've been sick, but this is unrelated to your stint in the hospital. This is just being sick.
Yeah, we had our family Christmas last weekend, the weekend before Christmas, and my son-in-law, Clint, came down with something while he was here. And they left on Sunday, and on Monday I come down with it. Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, I literally was in bed or on the couch the entire day. And we really ought to have a contest for this episode, Terry, and how many times I coughed during this episode. And I got a cough drop in. I'm trying to do my best. Or how many times I blow my nose. I got my Kleenex box right here. But, we just appreciate our supporters, so we didn't want to just not have one this week, so we're going to do the best we can. I'll just apologize ahead of time for the coughing fit. I'll try to cover my mic when I go on a coughing spell, but
if it gets too out of control, we'll try to take it out in post-production, but we have very limited time. My grandmother's viewing is this afternoon, and the funeral is tomorrow, and we just got back from Florida on Sunday and had to turn around and drive out east to where my family's at in Northern Virginia and West Virginia. So appreciate the prayers for my dad. I can't imagine, my dad's a minister. I can't imagine how hard it is for ministers to have to do funerals, as part of their job. But my dad is actually doing my grandmother, his mother's funeral. I don't know. He's. I think that's what my grandmother wanted, and he agreed to do it. So prayers for it all be over by the time this gets released. But I'm sure it's going to be rough on him. So appreciate the prayers.
Well, that's got to be very tough.
Yeah. Let's transition a little bit to. I want to talk about habitat projects, and even though you had to cancel a couple consulting visits because you came down with the crud this week, this is the time of year that our listeners have set through their hunting season. Some people might still be hunting, but they're trying to get their plans done for next year for habitat work. Not only, bedding, but funnels. We're going to talk about trail camera locations today, and also food sources. I'm going to tell you a little quick update, and then you can just run with this however you want. My farm is usually used for a lot of testing for real world. And Dwayne Hopkins and I decided to do some testing on some different varieties of cereal grains this year that are very, very popular in the dairy industry. And so I had not been to the farm. I spent most of the month of November in Illinois, and then we went to Florida for a couple weeks for our 25th anniversary. So I actually went to the farm on Christmas afternoon to see how these plots have been doing. And we've been warm the entire fall and winter, except for maybe one little cold spell. And I have a lot of acres of different varieties of cereal grains. And Don, the clovers and all of these cereal grains, the harvest salads, are mowed to the ground. and the beans and the corn have been browsed, but not hit as heavy as they normally are. Normally, I run out of beans by Christmas time, but what was a green carpet of these cereal grains, you can see dirt because they've eaten it down so much. I think it's a perfect segue to just talk about diversity and plans. We have to prepare for any condition possible coming next year with weather. And when you're talking to clients or you're giving recommendations or suggestions on this podcast, let's talk about starting to make those plans a little bit from food source, and then you can transition to bedding and trail cameras.
Yeah, so, diversity is key. Greens and grains. We never know what kind of winter we're going to have when we're planting in the spring. So we got to plan for both. If you have a mild winter like you've noted, the deer are really going to be on the greens. I hope we can get through this. If you got a mild winter, obviously the deer are going to be on the greens, like you noted, Terry. Or if you have a hard winter, they're going to hit the grains a lot harder. And so we got to, without knowing what the weather's going to be months in advance, we got to plan for both. And I was just checking my plots yesterday. Been cooped up in the house and had to get out. So I went out on the side-by-side and checked some trail cameras that I could easily drive right up to. And while I was out, I made a little video in one of my food plots. And that food plot was a NutriCrave corn plot that had been overseeded using a drone with harvest salad. And it'd be easy to see in the video that it's a great stand of corn, but it's also a great stand of the harvest salad, the cereal grain. So I show in the video looking right down the rows, and it's just a green carpet right down the rows. And then I'd mowed off part of that corn early in the season, and I stepped out of the standing corn into the mowed area, and it's just a green carpet. But I've got a new food plot program for my farm that's going to be implemented next spring, and it's not all that different from what I've been doing, but it is going to be a little different. So I'm going to start providing all my greens through overseeding. I mean, I'm going to have my clover fire breaks and all that, but I'm not going to have a plot dedicated to greens. Other than my clovers around my fruit trees, clover fire breaks, things like that. So like in this corn I just described, I've got the NutriCrave corn plot, but then I've got the greens in there as well. So you're basically getting two crops out of the one plot. Well, one of the keys here is going to be, I'm going to go in when the ground freezes, and I'm going to mow the rest of that corn. And what's going to happen is in the spring that the cereal grains from that harvest salad are going to green up and start growing. And I'm going to let them get a foot, 18 inches tall, into May, or early to mid-May. And then I'm going to spray those, kill them. And I'm going to instantly, hopefully the same day or within a day or two, I'm going to drill my soybeans right into that dying cereal grain. And it's going to do a couple of things. It's going to do multiple things, actually. They're all good. First of all, not working the soil is a good thing. So, when you don't disturb the soil, there's a lot of good things that happen. First of all, that cereal grain that I'm going to spray, it's going to be a layer of thatch on top of the ground. And that layer of thatch is going to suppress weed growth, and it's also going to hold in soil moisture. And the other thing it's going to do is when that young soybean plant germinates within that dead and dying vegetation, it's going to hide it from the deer and other critters, and you won't have near the browse pressure. So when that little soybean plant is in the two-leaf stage is when it's very vulnerable. If they nip that off too low, it kills the plant. And what this vegetation is going to do, this dying vegetation, it's going to protect that soybean plant during that two-leaf stage and help it get past that where it can survive some browse pressure. Then my soybean plots, if we switch over to the soybean plots that I'm going to be planting, I'm going to no longer, I'm going to try this anyway, so I'm going to advise people to wait until they see the results I have. next year I'm going to plant my soybean plots without a residual herbicide. So they're going to be going into that, just like I described, into that dead cereal grain. And the reason that I don't want to spray a residual is because I want to come back in the fall, and in those soybean plots, I want to plant another cover crop, if you will, that's going to grow within the soybeans. So that every one of my plots is going to be greens and grains together in the same plot, but it's going to be a different mix. So when you're planting corn, you don't want to plant corn into rye, because rye gives off a chemical I can't remember the name of, but it almost acts like a herbicide that affects corn. If you plant corn, it'll really stun it into rye. But if you plant a legume, that legume is putting nitrogen in the soil, which the corn will benefit from. So in my soybean plots, I'm going to overseed them with the legume. And just as a little preview here, one of the legumes in the mix is going to be hairy vetch. Hairy vetch is a legume that a lot of organic farmers will use because they're not wanting to put on chemicals, they don't or can't put on chemicals, and they don't want synthetic fertilizers either. So hairy vetch produces enough nitrogen that if you will let that plant mature in the spring, you plant it in the fall, it comes back in the spring, and by mid-May, there's enough nitrogen from that you can plant corn right into it. So I'm going to do the same thing on those plots, my soybean plots. They're going to, in the following spring, they're going to be coming up in this legume mix with the hairy vetch. I'm going to spray that, and then I'm going to no-till my corn right into it. And I'm going to use Resicor, a residual herbicide, because in my experience, just like my corn this year had Resicor sprayed on it, that Resicor does not last all that long, especially on grasses. So when I use Resicor on my corn, I'll get some foxtail, towards middle to end of summer, but not enough to hurt that corn crop. That corn crop it holds the weeds back long enough for that corn to really take off and get a really good stand. So I will continue using the pre-emergent herbicide on my corn because I know I can still come back in the fall and put my cover crop of cereal grains in. So that's going to be my recipe moving forward. And the reason I'm doing this is I cannot grow enough NutriCrave corn in the plots that I have now if I keep dividing them up. I've typically been about a third soybeans, a third corn, and a third greens. And I just run out of corn too early. Like right now, I'm almost out of corn. I was trying to get some ears for samples yesterday, and I did find some at one end, but that plot's going to be picked clean within a week or two. And then the rest of the winter, the deer are going to be on the soybeans and the greens, which will get them through. But I want to have more NutriCrave corn. So next year, it's going to be 50% NutriCrave corn, 50% Gen 2 soybeans, with the idea that both of those crops will be overseeded in the fall with a drone into two different mixes.
And you have a lot of fire break. I mean, you have a lot of switchgrass on your farm, so there is a lot of green legume all the way around 3 different tracts of switchgrass. So I see this, Don, I'm going to sign you up for this. I see this as a pretty good vlog update video through the whole process on Chasing Giants TV. I think this is going to be fascinating to follow along. It might completely flop. We don't know, but I think it's going to be fun for people to follow along.
Well, I actually just recorded a video yesterday when I was in that NutriCrave plot that's going to be on the real world social media as well as my own social media that just kind of previews this. And yeah, Terry, I am going to video document this whole process on Chasing Giants TV. They may be a series of really short videos. I mean, they may only be 3 to 5 minute videos, but I want to keep people engaged throughout the whole entire growing season, because I think this is the wave of the future, even in the ag industry. You're seeing more and more cover crops and regenerative farming practices taking place. So I'm just trying to do what's best for the soil, provide the most nutrient-dense plants I can for my deer herd, and maximize the usage of my plot space. Because I got compared to most deer hunters, I probably got a lot of food plot acreage. And a guy that's limited, if he can get 2 crops out of the same plot every year, that's like doubling his acreage. If he's got, say, a 3-acre plot, and he does what I'm talking about, it's like having a 6-acre plot, 3 acres
Right.
of greens and 3 acres of grain.
Or if we have some crazy drought or bad weather, hailstorm, whatever, and your corn doesn't make it, you still have a redundancy, a plan B, if you will, versus all your eggs in one basket. I see these guys on YouTube and social media just go all in, and all they have is one type of product in their food plot. And I'm telling you, it was amazing for me to drive out the farm. I got there, it was still hard enough I could drive the truck back. And the corn was standing. There was browse in the corn. The beans, I've never had beans this late. Even though my beans weren't even that good this year, my beans really struggled. And then you got to the area of the farm where I had these cereal grains just row after row after row with the drill. And I mean, it is just mowed down. I mean, it lost 10 inches, 8 inches where they've been hitting it. So we can't predict the weather for next winter. The weatherman can't even predict it for 3 days from now. But it's kind of like hedging your bet for whatever variable comes our way.
Yeah, there's just a lot of benefits to all this. I'm going to be using less chemical. I'm going to be using less fertilizer. I'm not going to be working the soil, so there's going to be less passes, so less fuel in my tractor, less time. And the approach I'm using is kind of similar to the crimping method, but I don't like the crimping method just because the timing has to be right when you go crimp those plants. If it's not, they just spring right back up. If you go out there, and then the ground conditions have to be right as well. So when that plant gets in the perfect condition for crimping, what if you get 2 or 3 inches of rain? You can't go out there in the mud and try to crimp.
Right.
I think it's just a whole lot easier to wait till it's planting time, go in and spray, and then immediately get that next seed in the ground so that as the crop that's there, whatever it may be, is dying off, your next crop can be germinating and coming on. And I'm pretty confident this is going to work. I mean, I've done some research and watched a bunch of videos from the ag industry, not from the food plot industry. And I think it's going to allow me to basically almost double the amount of food that I'm putting out in the same acreage with all the other benefits.
Yeah, I'm just sitting here thinking the guys that have limited space that want to add switchgrass, but they don't feel they have enough room. This is also an area where you could pull back the acres of food plot, but increase tonnage to allow you to add maybe some bedding on your property. Just an idea. But I know our good friend Clint Cross that is currently finishing up building my no-till corn planter is smiling from ear to ear right now, hearing us even, well, not you, but me willing to even talk about no-tilling. So I'm sure he's grinning ear to ear right now.
Yeah, he's a guy that's very familiar with the ag industry, and the whole no-till thing definitely has merit. There's no doubt about it. So
I think I watch a lot of farming YouTube channels. Our friends up at Larson Farms, they actually talked about this the other day. Just different fields that they have. Of course, they farm a lot of acres. I'm not sure how much they farm, but even they talk about some of Eric's fields. They can do no-till. Some of the other ones they can't because of that sticky gumbo soil that they have up there. They have to break it open. So I don't think, again, one method is right for every single situation that's out there, but there is definitely a lot of benefits if we can get by with it. So let's take a quick break and listen to our spot from Osseo. I want to come back, talk about Midwest Sportsman's Classic. I talked with Chris Yates yesterday from Victory GMC and Chevrolet. I asked him what he's got for the end of the year. I want to talk about that for a bit, and let's talk about trail camera locations. I think this is probably one of the most talked about and discussed projects that we can do and figure out this time of year as we prepare for all of our habitat plans. So we'll be right back.
Osseo Gear introduces a premium line of bow hunting gear that is unmatched. pairing nature's finest camouflage with the best technological innovations. Osseo Gear brings whitetail bow hunters the gear they need to be the best at their craft. The unique camouflage mimics the intricate feather pattern of North America's greatest predatory creatures. Designed for invisibility, built for comfort, and engineered for function. Visit OsseoGear.com. That's ASIO Gear.com to start shopping. Osseo Gear. Prepare to be invisible.
Okay, Don, I'm going to go ahead and put up a slide here from our buddy Chris Yates, and it's going to take me a minute because I only have one monitor today, so it takes me a minute to get there. He has got, the Duramax Chevy truck deal that we're on. It's got some tweaks to it right now, but these are the big savings right now. And for those listening on the audio platforms, I'm going to read this off to you. Between now and the end of the year, and we only got a couple days left, if you're looking for a car, it does not matter where you're at. He's got up to $14,000 off stock Sierra 1500s, even with a trade-in. Invoice pricing on 2025 HDs. $12,000 off stock Yukon XLs with a trade-in. $5,000 off Terrains and $5,000 off of stock Canyons. If you're looking for a vehicle, give him a shot. When I was trying to buy a new company vehicle, I was looking for a Yukon, and I called Chris, and even him shipping it to us in Kentucky or where my business is in Tennessee, he was still cheaper than everybody that was there. And you can vouch for the customer experience, how they don't make you sit there and wait for 4 hours when you're in there buying something. So if you want to talk to somebody, obviously visit Victory GMC of St. Joe. That's victorystjoe.com. John is the sales manager. I'm going to give you their phone number. It's 816-226-4206. Don, super great people. You just traded yours here what?
Well, it was either the end of October, first couple days of November. I don't remember exactly.
And they had
which.
your paperwork completely done. You were in and out. I've never dealt with a car dealership like this. And again, we want to support good Christian people that are like-minded with us, and that fits the bill with Mr. Yates and his team out in the Kansas City area.
It was the fastest trade-in I've ever done in my life. They had the paperwork filled out, just waiting for me to sign some papers, and they handed me the paperwork and the keys and showed me a couple things on the new truck, and away I went.
Let's talk about revisit the controversial cell camera. I don't know how long ago was that we did that? Probably in September or October, and it caused quite a stir, and there's still people talking about it. But I think you got some plans to do some, not really testing of the theory, but I think there's some lessons learned that you're going to start in your habitat projects building off of what you've learned with some of these things that we've talked about.
Yeah, I think, based on what I've seen on social media, well, I was talking to our distributor, Scott Fendell, a while back, and he made the comment, he says, there's people on the internet that they just look for you to post something so that they can disagree with it. There's that group of people that are just wanting to disagree with Don on anything he says, and sometimes it seems that way. And I think with the situation with the cell cams, and we basically asked the question, can deer detect them or whatever? And I don't know. There's several people that have agreed with us. I can't even remember how many comments on some of the posts, but also private messages, people saying you're right on the money. You don't get as many pictures from a cell cam as you do a non-cell at the very same location in their experience. And that's been my experience as well. But, a couple things to clear up. One is that we're not saying that you never get a picture of a mature buck on a cell cam. I get their pictures on cell cams all the time, but what we're saying is you don't get as many. Why is that? I don't know why. I don't have the answer why. But in my observation, and I didn't just start running trail cameras this year, and I don't just have 6 trail cameras out. I mean, I got 50 of them out, and I've been running them since they came out into existence. So I got a lot of experience, and I don't claim to know it all. I'm still getting better at it all the time. And, one lesson from this season that I'm going to apply on the trail camera side of things is I've got 12 Rayconics cell cameras out. And there's one of those cameras that always gets more pictures than the other 11 combined. Now, that's crazy to think about. Part of it's location, but that ain't all. I think it's the setup of that camera and how it's set up to catch the deer. And, every day that camera has got more pictures than the other 11 combined, just day after day. And the thing of it is I've never seen a deer that detected that camera. You see deer that are looking right in the camera, and sometimes their face is right up against it, where you just get the picture of an eyeball or an ear or antler base or something. Well, this camera, they can't do that because the camera is about 6 feet off the ground. It's at a fence crossing, an opening in a fence, an old cattle fence that I just went in and I pulled back an opening that's probably 20 feet wide. And there's a tree growing out of the fence back, well, it's probably 10 feet from where the opening is at. So it's at least 20 feet from the center of that opening where the deer come through. And I think what makes this camera so good and effective is the fact that the deer are never looking at it. So it doesn't matter which direction the deer come from to that opening, the camera is always off to the side. They're never facing that camera. And then the camera is up a little bit higher, and it's actually back a little bit farther from where I expect the deer to be than most of my other cameras. And I think all these factors combined are the reason for the success of that one camera location. So, what are we going to do with that information? Well, for me, this winter, I've got some other locations in mind that I can set up to be very similar to this situation. So the cameras are going to be off to the side of where the deer are traveling, not facing into the deer's face or anything like that. They're going to be a little bit higher in the tree. If I got to use a couple screw-in steps or something, whatever, I want to get them in that 6 to 8 foot high range. And I don't want the deer to ever be looking in that direction. Now, you're never going to control that 100%. But in a situation like this fence crossing, a deer comes up to this fence crossing, his attention is focused on the other side of that fence. It's not right there immediately around him so much. If he's going, this fence opening goes from a wooded, brushy area into an open field. So if he's coming out to that edge, he's focused his attention out in that open field where he's intending to go. And that's where he's focused on looking for danger. And if he's coming the other direction from that open field into the cover, it's the same way. He wants to look into that cover to see if he can detect any danger or anything. So when he's at that position right there in front of that camera, his focus is not to the side, it's in front of him, and the camera is to the side. So I'm going to use that knowledge this winter to enhance some current camera locations and even create some new ones. And it's just something that has worked at this one location. So anytime something works, I try to replicate it in other locations. And I think our listeners could benefit from doing the same. And, man, I pity our listeners having to deal with this podcast and all the coughing. But, our partner, Wes Delks, he made a statement a couple of years ago that, good camera locations are just like good stand locations. You build them. And I think that's one of the things I see with consulting so much is that a lot of consulting clients, they just take what their property gives them and they don't look to enhance it. So they're looking for good stand locations that already exist. And I come in and I'm looking to create great stand locations in situations that benefit the hunter more than they do the deer. And it's the same way with these camera locations. I want to create locations where I can get pictures of a lot of deer, but the odds of them locating that camera, seeing the camera, whatever, detecting that camera are very low. And that's something I'm going to put some effort into, this winter after season closes.
I only see one problem with your theory, and that's, I still stand behind the fact that the only way to age a buck at why he's still alive is the distance between the bottom of his giblies and his butthole. The older he gets, the further they sag. Well, if you're off to the side every time, you're never going to be able to age a buck, Don.
Well, now that is a big problem, but it's one that I don't worry too much about. I know that there are people out there that their goal is to see a buck's jewels. My goal is to see his rack. And I guess that makes me weird, but I'm just going to have to remain weird.
You don't care about finding the king buck? Is that what you're saying?
No, I care about finding the buck with the biggest antlers. There's a guy on the internet right now, he'll give Mr. King Buck a run for his money. Yep. I'm not going to mention any names, but boy, they come out of the woodwork with some crazy ideas.
Coming this February to the Michiana Event Center in Shipshewana, Indiana, the FAE Midwest Sportsman Classic. Thursday, February 13th through Saturday, February 15th. Come see the Whitetail Legends Classic with Bobby Worthington, Don Higgins, Al Foster, Joe Miles, Gene Winsell, Barry Winsell, and moderator Terry Peer.
We started shooting arrows. Here we are pushing 80 years old and we haven't put our toys away yet.
To say like these lights really bright my eyes, and I know what the buck felt like that Don Higgins got last year right before he pulled the trigger.
When I got to hunting the whitetail deer later on, I realized I was hunting the number one prey animal in the world, the most difficult animal in the world to kill.
Before that week was over, my heart was broken because I found out they had a naked man in their room. True story.
Whitetail bucks aren't supposed to be easy. A mature whitetail buck, he's the top of the line. I mean, he's the top challenge in the archery world, and it's supposed to be a close range sport.
I think that there's too many deer hunters out there that are trying to improve their success through their equipment instead of their woodsmanship skills.
Don't miss the Chasing Giants live podcast on Thursday night. Brian Dickinson, the author of Blind Descent, on stage Friday and Saturday. Mark Zona, the Hall of Fame angler, will be live on Thursday and Friday to show you how legends catch big fish. Also in this year's Unmatched speaker lineup, Terry Hodges, the legendary game warden and author of the thrilling Warden Force series. Team Radical on big game hunting and predator calling. Andy Andreas on fruit trees for wildlife. Smokey from Smokey's Deer Lures. And James Watson, Ross Robertson, and Mike Raber rounding out our next level fishing lineup. Thousands of dollars in attendee giveaways, guns, a double drop hunting blind, a fishing trip, Osseo camo, kayak, and more. Find a full show schedule at MidwestSportsmanClassic.com. Tickets available at the door. February 13th, 14th, and 15th. For more information, go to MidwestSportsmanClassic.com.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit about Midwest Sportsman's Classic. I just played the commercial spot again. We're going to be putting it on our social media this week. The details are starting to come together as far as schedules, and I was talking to our friend at Brenton Firearms, Nick Carpenter, the other day, and I think there's only just a few booths left. We've said this before. Nick said it. He goes, we went to so many trade shows last year. This is the only place that he has gone and actually moved product to the level that they are. Joe Miles has said the same thing. Jay Gingrich said the same thing. I know there's a lot of our listeners that are planning on attending just because they want to get to meet Al Foster, Bobby Worthington, or the Winsells, or you and Joe. But this is pretty much a last shot at filling the few booths that they have. They extended the show area out to the other wing. If you're a business and you want to connect with a lot of people that are outdoor enthusiasts, like-minded, please come. Lester's Feet is going to do a fundraiser on site very similar to what we did last year. Can't really talk about specifics of that right now, but most of the board from Lester's Feet, including my oldest daughter that basically had the vision to start it, is going to be there, and we'll be there to talk about different families that we're helping and be able to raise some more money. So look forward to seeing everyone there. Before we get into answering questions this week, let's listen to a spot from our friends at Midwest Land Group. And, these interest rates are creeping, are going to be very interesting as the administration changes, and a lot of people are looking at properties right now. So if you're looking at recreational properties, make sure you hit up Midwest Land Group, and we'll be right back.
Ever had a terrible real estate experience? Average realtors usually spend more time selling themselves than on selling your land. They'll tell you anything to get the listing. They know that if they get the listing, you're stuck with them. Not here. Midwest Land Group has changed the way land is sold and is the only brokerage to offer a 100% satisfaction guarantee. That means if we don't meet your expectations, you can fire us. That puts all the pressure on us to perform. We don't just list land, we sell it. If you're looking to buy or sell property, don't before you talk to us. Visit us at MidwestLandGroup.com.
Well, I'm going to propose something to you, Don. Since you're having coughing fits, we're going to showcase my Kentucky public education system and keep you from talking a little bit. And I'll read the question to you, and you can focus on answering. How about that?
That would be wonderful.
Andy Hendricks from Anderson, South Carolina. Hey, Don and Terry. Hope you've had a wonderful Christmas. Do you have a preferred method between hack and squirt or girdling in regard to clearing to promote undergrowth? When is the best time to do either of those? Thanks for producing such great content.
Well, Andy, both methods have their place. My preference, based on the timber that I'm typically cutting, is girdling. I just think girdling works a whole lot better on the species that I'm typically girdling or trying to kill. It does a fantastic job. Cut 2 rings around that tree, about 6 inches apart. Break that cambium layer, which is a layer right between the bark and the wood, and you stop the flow of sap or energy from the roots, out to the leaves and back and forth. And so that's a very effective method that I use. On some bigger trees, I will occasionally go and spray a herbicide in that girdle cut, but you don't really need to. That just kind of speeds up the process. Sometimes that girdle cut may take a couple years to totally kill the tree. The first year when you do it, the tree will leaf out, but it won't leaf out near as full as it typically would. So you might have half the leaf cover that you would typically have. In the second year, it's dead. If you're in an area where you're trying to kill pine trees, I was on a couple different properties here in December already where there's substantial pine tree plantings from years ago that are basically worthless today. And in that case, hack and squirt is a really good way to do it. That softer wood just makes it really easy. They make a special hatchet where you put the chemical, the herbicide, in the handle of the hatchet. And when you make that swing and you chop into the bark on that tree, it releases through the blade a small amount of that herbicide. And using the straight herbicide, it's really potent. It hadn't been diluted at all. And bigger tree, you may have to, hack it 2 or 3 or 4 times, whatever. But a lot of smaller trees, and it's so much faster and it works so much better on trees, softwood trees like pine. So a lot of it just depends on the species of trees as to which method I prefer. As far as the time of the year to do it, in the winter, when you can get in there, you need to be good at identifying tree species just by the bark, though. at the bark and the branch structure. And once you learn it, I mean, just start out with a couple of species and just kind of add to it as you go. And you see one that you don't recognize, get on an app or whatever and figure out what it is, and then from that point forward you'll recognize it, and you just slowly add new species that you can recognize, and pretty soon you'll be able to tell every tree in the woods just by its bark. And but that's really the key to these TSI projects, is being able to identify the tree species. How you kill them is not that important. I mean, yeah, some methods work better than others for some species, but if you can't identify the species to begin with, you shouldn't be out there doing it. For example, white oaks versus red oaks, or walnuts versus ash. If you can't look at that bark and tell what that tree is, you don't need to be out there doing it. You could actually do more harm than good.
Yeah, and so the other part of his question, I don't think you hit on that, is what time of the year is best to do this, Don?
In the winter, when those trees are dormant, you can get out there, and this time, when you're starting in the fall, the trees are pulling energy down into the roots. That's what makes the trees change color in the fall, is the tree is pulling the energy out of the leaves and taking them down and storing them into the roots for the winter. So when you do it in the winter, that sap flow is still downward. Now in the spring, it reverses. And in the spring, when they tap sugar maple trees to make maple syrup, collect that sap, that sap flow has reversed, and it's been stored in the roots all winter, and now it's coming back out towards the end of the branches to make the tree bud out and leaf out in the summer. So in the wintertime, you still got that sap flow going down into the roots, and that's what you want with that poison, with the hack and squirt. And even with the girdling, you've taken all that tree's energy and you put it down in the roots over the fall and early winter. You girdle that tree, so in the spring, that tree is not able to shoot that energy back out into the ends of the branches. And yeah, there's still a little bit left in the trunk of the tree and such, and that's why that tree will leaf out a little bit, never fully, halfway or whatever. But winter is the time to do it. That's a long-winded way of saying do it in the winter.
All right. We'll get the next one up. It takes me just a second. Here we go. This is a longer one. Listener submitted question number 2 from Jason. How do we say that last name, Don?
I'd say Brazda.
Brazda from Nunica, Michigan. I have a farm in East Central Illinois, and I have a question regarding neighbors, specifically outfitters that lease the neighboring property. The outfitter who leases put a ladder stand 1 feet from my property line that faces onto their property, but they can easily shoot any direction. They also put a little half-assed food plot that goes to the property line. With the amount of trouble I have been hearing about this outfitter getting into, I know full well that their East Coast clients wouldn't think twice about shooting onto my land if the right buck came and gave them a shot. I spoke with all the local game wardens about this group and have also called the outfitter, letting them know I do not appreciate their approach, and if they do not have permission to shoot or track on my land without speaking to me. My question is to you, how would you handle the situation like this? Hunting has progressively gotten worse since the outfitter moved in.
Well, this is going to be a controversial answer, but it's one that a lot of listeners are probably expecting, and this is where fences come in. And folks, I'm telling you, in 20 years, fences are going to be so common in the Midwest, people aren't even going to think about it. Guys, that'll be hunters 20 years from now that are little kids today. They're going to grow up into an era where fences are very common, and the reason for it is the demand on our resources is greater than ever, and we got these various interests or ideas on how the resource should be managed. You got one neighbor that wants to shoot every deer because they're eating his crops, and right next to him is a guy that's trying to grow big bucks. So the only way to deal with various or ideas that conflict with each other that bad is there has to be some kind of barrier between the properties. And I know a lot of guys don't like to hear it, and I wish it didn't come to this myself. But if you're going to grow big deer or let deer of any size get to the next age class, whatever that might be, you got to keep them alive. And, I have no idea who the outfitter he's talking about or anything like that, but it doesn't necessarily have to be an outfitter. It can just be an individual person. If your goals conflict that much with your neighbor, there's really only one way to deal with it. Well, actually two. You could sell that property and go look for another one, or you build a fence. And there's really no other two options.
Yep. Two sides of the spectrum for sure.
Yep.
All right. Our third question comes from Jacob Boston from Reedsville, Ohio. Hey, Don and Terry, Merry Christmas. This year in Southern Ohio, we've struggled with a drought, so overall food has been different. My question is, with all of the food options like fall plots, in parentheses, he has deadly dozen, general orchard grass, alfalfa, hay fields, clover fields, and lastly, winter wheat fields, all at least 1+ acres, all readily available. Why am I seeing more deer than ever browse in plain cow pastures with a lot of general fescue, more than I have seen, almost like the deer are preferring them over fall plots, some pastures being right next to these plots? Wondering if you can shed some light on your thoughts and why I'm seeing this. Also note that no fertilizer lime has been put on the pasture as well.
Well, Jacob, fescue is probably one of the least palatable grasses available. It's not a native of North America. Its primary use is in erosion control. So a lot of waterways, ditches and such are seeded to fescue because it's got a really dense sod-based root system, and it'll hold your soil from eroding, even on steep hillsides. So even if you know anything about cattle pastures at all, fescue is a very low preference grass for pastures. The fact that you're seeing deer out browsing in fescue, which deer are not grazers like cattle, they're browsers. There's almost always other vegetation growing in a situation like that. It may not be so dominant that you can see it, from a distance, but if you get down and look close, there's something else growing out there that those deer are eating on. I don't know. It could be just a weed that they prefer, but my guess is they're not feeding on the fescue.
It reminds me of when you observed a specific type of clover that when we adjusted the clover blend years ago. My guess is there's some anomaly with a variety of plant growing in that pasture that's high in soluble protein or feed value, that they're just going along and nipping the top off and again, that's diversity, right? There's something there that for some reason they're browsing on, and it'll last for a while and then probably rotate to something else.
Yeah, and I was thinking of the very same situation that you just brought up, and to expand on that just a little bit, several years ago, there was a situation where about this time of the year, actually, I've noticed that in the evening time, the deer were leaving my place. They were bedding on my place, using my sanctuary during the day. They were leaving my place in the evening, and they were walking past 4 different houses to get to a neighbor's pasture. And he had just put this, it'd been farmed for years, and he had just put it into pasture and had planted it into this pasture mix. And these deer, instead of coming to my food plots, which were right there by the sanctuary they were bedded in, they went the opposite direction to feeding this guy's newly planted pasture. And I thought, I got to figure out what these deer are eating, because I got to be planting some of it. And I just stopped one day and I got out and I looked in that pasture mix, and there was a red clover in the mix. And that's what those deer were eating. I knew it had to be something different than what I had, and it was something that the deer preferred. So it was a red clover. Well, I knew where the seed mix came from, and I did my research, and I figured out what that specific red clover was. And It just so happened that it came from our partners at Kitchen Seed Company. And so got with Dwayne, and Dwayne and I did some detective work on that situation to figure out exactly what it was. And we started including that particular clover in our clover and chicory mix. So it's just one of those, weird, long stories of how some of our success has happened. And it was just me being observant and doing the detective work to figure out exactly what it was that those deer were eating. But to tie it back to this question, from a distance, you would just think those deer are going out and eating pasture grass, orchard grass, timothy, whatever. But they were actually going out there to eat that clover.
Well, and the thing about it is, if you planted a field of that red clover, the deer will hammer it or eat it in a specific scenario or time of the year or weather condition when that variety is peaking at the key on a food plot blend is having different varieties that peak at different times. So you want a variety that is really palatable and attractive in the spring during drought conditions of the summer. And like this is probably happening with this listener in the fall. But what's happening right now, there's something in there that they like, but it won't last long. It'll transition to something else as it moves forward.
Right.
All right. Let me get this other one up here.
To go back to that question while you're pulling this one up, there is no way that deer are preferring fescue over a cereal grain. There's something there besides fescue.
All right. This one comes from Ben Sweeney from, what's that city name?
I call it Walk-On, but I don't know.
Walking, Iowa. Hey, Don and Terry, been planting food plots for 15 plus years. Being in northern Iowa, the Brassicas were always a hit for late season. Being warmer and shorter winters the last few years, the turnip bulbs are rotting early from the milder temps and the deer don't touch them. Having some bulbs in the Deadly Dozen mix, have you seen the same results?
Yeah, I have, but here's what we got to keep in mind. Those bulb plants, the turnips and the radishes, yeah, they are a food source, but they're doing so much more than that. So if you think of a turnip, you got that big bulb, but off the bottom of that bulb, you got this big, long hair root. And that hair root is digging down, 2 feet or more sometimes. And what it's doing is it's pulling those nutrients that are deep in the soil, it's pulling them up to the surface in the other part of the plant. And then the plant deteriorates, and those nutrients are left up there close to the surface where the next crop you plant can benefit from them and utilize those nutrients. So, I think a lot of times, and I see it with consulting clients a lot as well, they are only thinking of their food plots in terms of, it's a hunting location. They're using their food plots to attract deer to a location for hunting. And we're going beyond that. Sure, we want to bring those deer and create huntable travel patterns by having very defined food sources, very defined bedding areas, and very defined travel corridors between the two. But we also want to use our food plots as a way to improve the nutrition that our deer get. And as part of that whole process, to go even to the next level, to increase the nutrient content of the plants we are growing requires us to manage our plots and our soil different than the guy that's just out, with some throw and grow cheap mix from Walmart, trying to attract deer in front of a tree stand. So to get back to the question, yeah, I've seen situations where in a mild winter, those plots will rot instead of getting eaten. And I'll tell you what, if you've never been, past a plot of rotting turnips, you don't know what stink is. You can smell that stink for a long ways off when they start rotting, but it's a good thing. That decaying vegetation is basically the nutrients that plant has brought from down deep in the soil to the surface where the next crop can utilize it. So my point is, don't get too upset that the deer haven't totally consumed all your turnips and radishes, because it's providing a real benefit for your plot next year. And yeah, you never know when the next brutal winter is going to come along. There's no way, especially in northern Iowa, there is no way that I would not have brassicas, turnips, radish, whatever it may be, out there every year. Because when that brutal cold spell may only last for a few days, but during that few days, the deer will be hammering those plants. And again, we go back to variety, diversity. We want to provide as many different varieties of food sources, quality food sources as we can for the deer. And those brassica plants are part of that.
Yep. Good question. All right. The last one for the show is from Andy. Boy, I've got some hard words this episode. Schwalbert? How you say that?
That's what I would say, Schwalbert.
Imperial, Missouri. Dear Don and Terry, thank you for taking the time to answer my question. My question is regarding food plots. My farm is in southern Illinois, not far from Kentucky, and I've been contemplating planting 4 acres of your soybeans next year, but because we don't get a harsh weather that the northern part of the state gets, I'm wondering just making a 4-acre green plot would be a better option. Curious on your thoughts on this. Trying to have the best pulling power I can during the hunting season. I have several plots on the farm with clover, and I'll be trying some of your sorghum next year as well. Seems like we got a common theme with a couple questions this week.
Yeah, the reason I picked this one is I wanted to go back and what we was talking about early in the show about double cropping in your plot. And I think this is a perfect situation where you don't have to choose between greens and grains. Try to produce both in the same plot. And if your grains fail, then you've always got the greens to fall back on. And what if, lately we've had several really dry falls. The last 2 years, for example, we've had pretty good growing conditions in the spring and through the summer, but then we get into the fall months and it really dries up. Well, if you wait and do nothing but do fall planted plots and greens, last year's fall plots of mine were the worst I ever had, and it was because of lack of rain. They just didn't get any rain.
Right.
And I think you're way better off to hedge your bet and get that grain planted in the spring and then come in the fall and overseed. And we're going to try to help you with that and do some education through our videos. And I'm sure we'll be talking about it on the podcast as well. But instead of picking one or the other, why not do both? And why not do both in the same plot?
Well, and let's say you got a 4-acre field. I mean, to me, I'm dividing that field into 2 acres of corn, 2 acres of beans with both fall greens inside of it, and probably a clover border up against my trees around the outside. And then I have everything in that one plot, and then I just flop everything every year. Everybody gets so caught up into having, well, this part of the farm, I have this variety. I don't want to give deer choice. I want to give them every choice in one location with the best stand sites and access to that one location that I can provide and stay out of the rest of it. I think it's just, again, it's like last week's episode. We overcomplicate this so much. Instead of giving choices for the deer, give them every choice in one spot.
Yeah, you could easily take that 4 acres and provide at least a dozen different plant species with your beans, your corn, your clover, and then everything in your overseed mixes. Easily a dozen different things.
Yep. Well, Don, we've punished you and our listeners enough trying to get to this podcast. I'll try to edit out as much of the coughing as I can. I really appreciate, we didn't want to skip an episode. We were going to actually record this earlier in the week, but you were sick and we're having to do this while I'm remote, with family situations. So appreciate everybody hanging in there. Reminder after this episode, the closing credits are Sunday Night Prayer Time is from Daryl Monk of Wise Eye Camera. This is Harold's brother. He's done one of them so far. Super great people. Glad to have him on that. And thanks for being willing. And also, if you missed our Christmas release hunt video our friend Patrick Simpson's 14-year-old son, Bryson Simpson, shot a youth hunt. We featured that hunt video on Christmas Day. So go to our YouTube channel and check out Bryson's hunt. I'm really happy that so many people have encouraged him on his first out-of-state youth hunt in the comments. So make sure you leave one congratulating him as we're getting the next trained generation of big buck killers like Patrick ready to go on our properties. So,
I haven't even watched that video yet. I felt so bad. I haven't even watched that video. I think I'm got a fever right now. I'm sitting here sweating.
Well, let's get you back to bed. We appreciate everybody's show. Don, sign us off. Make sure you stay tuned to Sunday Night Prayer Time. We'll see you next week.
God bless everyone. Hope to be back next week feeling better.
Chasing Giants has been brought to you by Osseo Camo. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode of Chasing Giants.
Hi, I'm Daryl with Wise Eye. I hope everyone had a very Merry Christmas and spent time with friends and family to reflect and just to thank God for what He's done for us in our lives, especially sending His Son Jesus to die for us. I want to speak to you today about being hot or cold and lukewarm. I was raised in a church, raised up Baptist, and we spoke a lot about being hot or cold. Don't be hot. You need to be hot or cold and not lukewarm. And what does that really mean? I found it interesting that I really didn't understand what that meant. So do you either all in as hot or all in as cold, and God accepts us in either one of those positions, but don't be in the middle? I got doing some digging in it with and listening to some commentaries from some theologians, and I found it very interesting. If you look at those scriptures of what Jesus is talking about in Revelation and really put it in context, it makes a whole lot more better sense, I guess, of what Jesus is really telling the church of Laodicea here. Let me read Revelations 3:15 and 16, and we'll dig into it a little bit. I know your deeds, that you are neither cold nor hot. I wish that you were cold or hot. So because you are lukewarm and neither hot or cold, I will spit you out of my mouth. So what is Jesus saying here to the church at Laodicea? I either want you to be all in, I either want you to be all for me or all against me, but not in the middle. That's not what he's saying here at all. Looking back at the resources that the church of Laodicea had, Laodicea was a very, very wealthy and prosperous city. The church of Laodicea was lacking in one thing that they didn't have plenty of, and that was water. So what Jesus is telling the church at Laodicea here is the church at Colossae, they had a good church that was to the letter from Paul to the Corinthians. There was a great city there. They had a church there, but they were known for their cold water, their refreshing cold water. So if you've ever been out on a hot summer day, especially if you live in the South, you're out you're out, just you're hot, you're just sweating, and you see a water fountain, and you run up to that water fountain, and you go to get a drink, and it's warm. You don't keep drinking it. You spit it out, and it's like, oh, so you go somewhere where you can find some fresh, cold water. So here, Jesus was saying that, cold water, they was piping water from Laodicea to Colossae to pipe in the cold water. And Colossae was 6 miles away from Laodicea. So can you imagine water being piped from Colossae into the city of Laodicea? By the time it got there, it was lukewarm. So it wasn't refreshing anymore. And then 11 miles away was Hierapolis. Hierapolis was known for hot water. They had hot springs there that was full of minerals, full of calcium. It had medicinal powers to it, to help in healing certain ailments. And it had a purpose. So it was 11 miles away. So if you piped in the water from there to Laodicea, 11 miles, by the time it got there, it was lukewarm. Same scenario. You go to drink the hot water because you needing some ailments. You're needing the hot water to help heal some things on your body or internally, and you go to drink it, and it's lukewarm. It's lost its calcium deposits and minerals by the time it's piped 11 miles. So it's lukewarm by the time it got there. So this is what Jesus is talking about here. So putting these two together, cold water being piped in, hot water being piped in. So Jesus is saying here, I need you hot or I need you cold. Not lukewarm, because lukewarm water, some translations, if you translate the word spit, meant vomit. So if they drank that hot water that was piped in, it was lukewarm with the minerals, it didn't taste good, and it would literally make you vomit it out. So that's what Jesus was saying here. So what's his point? Jesus' point here is to stay close to the source. The closer you are to the source of cold water, the more refreshing it is. The closer you are to the hot water, the healing power it has. So don't be in the middle. Laodicea was in the middle of this. So Jesus used the analogy of hot water coming in, cold water being piped in, and you're far away from the sources. How beautiful a description of that is, that the church today, it has healing powers. If you need healing, the church can help heal. And the church can also be refreshing. So I encourage you to find a local church if you're not involved in one, and get together with other believers. Worship Christ in a local church, because that's where healing is, and that's where refreshing is. It depends on your situation. It depends on the needs that you're going through in your life at the time. So this opened up my eyes to a different look at hot, cold, and lukewarm. Don't ride the fence, I was always taught. Get on one side or the other. God's not happy with us if we're on the right side or the left side, the way I was thinking about it. But if you think about it as the way the church of Laodicea with the water aspect, that's the message that Jesus was teaching Laodicea. So thank you for listening. I wish everybody a happy new year, and thank you again for this opportunity, and I wish you all well, and I'm going to say a prayer and close out with prayer here, and I will see you next time. Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for your seasons, Lord, that you give us. Thank you for this Christmas time that we had of reflection of your son's birth, Lord. We thank you so much. I pray now that you will help us to be hot or cold, Lord, close to the source. That source is you. Help us to stay close to the source. Stay close to you for your wonderful healing power and your refreshing cold water, fresh of water, Lord, that whatever that need that we have in our lives. Thank you again for your love. Thank you. We ask these things in Christ's name. Amen.